Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to 1% Better, where we take a look at hidden stories in sports. I'm Jan Frodeno, and I'm joined by Dr. David Lipman. And as he's not a practicing doctor anymore, I love testing his knowledge to see what he still remembers. Right, in emergency medicine, did you ever do emergency medicine?
It's actually my favorite. I guess, rotation as a junior doctor. Which is weird because I never wanted to save any lives. It was not something I ever wanted to do. Like many people go into medicine going like, I want to save lives, and I was always like, I don't want to save lives. I want to help
Checks
people
out
be
for
healthier.
you, knowing your personality. Checks out. Yeah.
Thanks, mate. Thank you. I was trying to help people be healthier. Thank you. But it was weird. I really liked it because it was a good team environment. The roster was actually quite good because you'd have nights and like long shifts, but when you were gone, and you could sort of swap shifts with people and make it work and get weekends off here and there and like longer blocks off, maybe 3-4 days, but also like the good variety and like usually had 3-4-5 patients you were caring for at a time, and it was like lots of it just could be anything from an eye to a skin rash to a like sick person, like a properly sick person. So it was just interesting. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, here's your emergency medicine question. In the ABC approach to emergencies, what does A
Airway,
stand for?
airway.
Oh, easy. That easy, hey?
Mate,
Uh,
that's not even emergency medicine, man. That's first aid. It's all about what takes preference. We're actually gonna get to this later in the doctor's office, but like it's about understanding what is gonna cause more issues earlier. So if you don't have an airway, like it doesn't matter if the heart's beating or not, because like you're not gonna get air in, and that's like a priority. You've got like shorter time. So yeah.
what's the craziest thing you saw in the emergency room? Because I'm from South Africa and I've got a mate who worked at the local private hospital here. And sometimes the things that he saw at 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning, like I could not believe it.
Oh, there's different categories of this, and doctors love to tell stories, and there's varying amounts that you can and you should and shouldn't share or whatever. I was in an emergency room when we got what they called a code brown. It was when I was a student actually, and a code brown isn't when the poop hits the fan. It's actually an environmental. It's an environmental issue. And so, like, there'd been an exposure to I can't remember what it was, but that like kicked in a bunch of stuff that you had to then we have to discontaminate these people, and they have to be in this area, and then we have to wear this PPE. So it was really interesting. So that was quite cool to see as a student. And then practicing, probably the thing I saw that was the craziest was I worked on the Gold Coast, and there's the big drug problem on the Gold Coast, and there was a guy who came in on GHB, and he was basically, for all intents and purposes, like he looked like he was dead, like he's completely unresponsive, and I was like, this is what do we have to do here? And my boss was like, he'll perk up in a couple of hours. And I think by the end of the shift, he was like up there, took a couple of selfies with us, and then like was like, "Thanks, guys, see you later." He'd been found like face down in a gutter, like absolutely, like for all intents and purposes, like unresponsive. And then 6 hours later was just fine. So it was really strange. That still sticks with me. That one particularly.
Man, you've gone from all of that to just a podcaster.
I would like to believe I'm more than a podcaster, but thanks, mate. Appreciate the compliments.
I
Full of
know
them, aren't
you.
you?
Just for the
Full of
listeners,
them.
he hates people saying that to him.
Full of compliments, aren't you? We
uh,
won't talk about how your lack of professionalism this morning, but we'll some of that will come up on social this week. But mate, yeah, what's you're back from Rwanda, mate? What's the story?
I am back from Rwanda, and just a quick shout out to Precision Fuel and Hydration, who supports this podcast. I woke up at home yesterday after some hectic travel. I took their 1500 electrolytes, and I just felt like that put me back together. Is that? I wanted to ask you: is that a placebo, or could that be real?
Could be both, mate. Could be either or both. I think that with travel, I use their 1500s a lot with travel. It's probably where I use them the most. The reason is because if you drink a lot on a plane, you have to get up and pee a lot, and that's annoying for everybody, right? You, the people you're sitting around, etc. But also, there's the plane's got very dry air because they recycle it. It's not humidified, so it can be quite it can dehydrate you. And then on top of that, between that recycled air and the dehydration and all those things, you can end up with dry mucous membranes in your nose and throat, which is a risk for infection. And then there's all sorts of stuff floating around the plane anyway. So I try and use it quite a bit on the planes to help with all that stuff. And the reason you use electrolytes, and particularly stronger ones, is because if you don't, you end up peeing out a bunch of water. The salt helps hold it in. So I tend to use them quite a bit for that and really enjoy them. I've actually told the guys that, and they sort of nodded their head politely. I'm not sure how much they cared, but so it doesn't surprise me. And if you are dehydrated, you will feel like garbage. So having some of that, having some electrolytes will help that.
By the way, good news if you'd like to check out Precision Fuel and Hydration. We do have a 15% discount code off your first order. We have a direct link in the show notes down below if you'd like to follow it that way. Or the discount code is, handing over to you,
Number
David, because we have a new one and I cannot remember what it is.
It's the number 1 and then PB. And apologies, last week, because we pre-recorded that episode, it was still the old code that I said, but it is actually the number 1 PB in capital letters, 2025.
By the way, we heard back from Precision on how that code is doing. I would like to thank every single one of us, every single one of you for supporting us. We are blown away that people listen, they subscribe, and they go out and help us with our partners. So thank you so much. By the way, if you are new here, I'd also like to take this opportunity to subscribe to the podcast. We drop a new one every single Friday. A new episode every single Friday. You were asking me about Rwanda. We'll talk a little bit more about the cycling world champs in detail, but yeah, I've just returned from there. My back was absolutely broken, so I was very, very grumpy. I've come home the last 2
and
days.
forcing poor old Wendy to carry all your bags. I saw an Instagram picture of you forcing her to carry all your bags for you.
Man, I have to tell you. So we lived right on the course. We lived right. If you watch the race, there was a cobbled climb called Kimururu with about 2K to go, and our apartment was right on that course. So when we tried to get there, the roads were closed already, so our cab couldn't get there. So we had to carry our luggage for like 2 kilometers. When I say we, my wife.
I was going to say, is this one of those cases where it's we again? And
So
then Spencer pulls back out that we meme?
exactly. So she was carrying about 30 kgs, and there were two sides of the road. One had a sidewalk, the other was a drainage line. And because, the racing was going on, they wouldn't let us cross. So we were on the side of the drainage line. So not only was she carefully walking over a drainage line, she was carrying 30 kgs of luggage. And me with my back problems, I'm not allowed to carry stuff that hectic. But all the crowds were like looking at this situation going on here. Here's this woman walking in front of this guy. They're clearly together. He's barely carrying anything. And she's got a giant 20 kg suitcase in front. She's got a 10 kg suitcase on her arm and a backpack. Oh, I don't know if it was hilarious or
And
it's just
did anyone
interesting.
offer to help?
Only towards the end, yeah, we passed a restaurant and a security guard called one of the waiters and said, "Help this lady." And we actually made friends with him the rest of the week. Every time we passed it, we were like, "Hey, Gilbert, how you doing?" But he was the only one.
Right, I don't know what to say. I don't know how hard to go at you for being a terrible person, but we'll leave it at that.
Oh man, it's not a terrible person. I was in so much pain. And then I've been home for 2 days now with minimal pain, almost no pain. And it's just so frustrating with this nerve. You just don't know what it responds to. Like I started up with the biokinetics in the gym yesterday and I was crying to him how I'm ready to have a spinal fusion. I can't keep living like this anymore. So after Rwanda, I was ready to head straight to the hospital, give me a fusion. And then our last 2 days, minimal pain. Super session with the bio yesterday, no pain. It's just so frustrating how up and down it is.
Yeah, there is no better way to explain it than that.
But I chatted to a bunch of people who've had fusions, whose parents had fusions 35 years ago, and they were very encouraging. I'm seeing a doctor in Cape Town in a couple of weeks at the UCT hospital to get a second opinion. I need to get back to cycling at some stage. I can't keep living without doing sport like this. It's very, very hard. But anyway, enough about me. Let's go on to you, man. Running is going well for you.
Yeah, it's gone. I've probably the last couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks, to sort of turn a bit of a corner. Enjoying it more, sustaining close to 60 k's a week. It's like high 50s. So yeah, it's just been just steady, consistent. I did like 18 k's on the treadmill last Saturday, like with a good heat stimulus because I just sort of locked the room up. And yeah, like it's like I'm not hating it. So I'm not wanting to do a lot more. And there's one run a week where I'm like, all right, I'm done. But for the most part, I'm pretty happy with it all. I've done some longer stuff with friends, done some shorter stuff, done some faster stuff. So yeah, it's all going pretty well. I think I'm running okay too. Like I think I'm feeling okay doing it as well, and running pretty well. So it's been good, man.
It's so
Yeah.
interesting that you're doing with this with no goal, no race in mind. I wonder how many of our listeners skew that way because I think some people need a goal. Some people are content to do it for life, for health, for mental health, etc. I wonder what percentage of our listeners, what box they find themselves in.
I think what I'd say is it's easier to do a lot when you have a goal because there's something there that forces you out the door a little bit and forces you into that. And I think a lot of people sort of resonate with that. I think most of our listeners could probably do 30 to 60 minutes a day out of habit or for health. I think it's when you're doing more than that, right? It's and I can say this from my personal experience. So to this point, till I started struggling with this stuff, you never had to like I didn't need a goal. I was like hammering. I was going hard at all times. I never struggled with motivation, uh, and this certainly has been good empathy for me to gain with people because like now I understand what it's like to not want to exercise much or wanting to stop because I never understood
Interesting.
that.
Oh,
I've like in
wow.
my life I'd never understood not wanting to do exercise, never understood not wanting to go hard, all that stuff. So this has been good for me, and I've got that level of self awareness on it. But it is hard to push to an area where you're not interested, like where you're either bored or in pain or don't really want to do it. Like that's hard to do if you don't have a good reason to do it, right? And the problem I have is like I know where probably the line for health is, and I'm like, oh, we're there, we're good.
Yeah, no need to
And
push
then to
further
push more, yeah,
because
to push more is really
psychologically,
hard.
oh, you need the mind to come along, and in order for the mind to come along, you need to give it something realistic it can buy into. So it's easier
Yeah,
when you have a goal.
yeah. And so it's been good for me to just go back to, and I said this to you. I remember I was at a conference. I think I might have mentioned this on the podcast. I was at a conference like September, maybe 2 years ago. And I remember sending you a voice note. And it was like, I'd seen this guy running and he was running in a cotton t shirt and in like some like random shoes, not running shoes. Like I know all the running shoes. They were not running shoes. And he was like running down the street and just going hard.
I remember that. It
But
was Belgium, I think.
it was in Belgium. Yeah, it was in Belgium. And I was like, I just looked at this guy and I just thought, I remember what it was like to do that. Just go out and just decide you want to go for a run and just run and run. You didn't run easy or do intervals. You just like ran as hard as you could for that distance. So you would just do a time trial basically. And I remember what that felt like. And I remember saying at the time, like, I kind of miss being able to just do that. Everything was like much less complicated. There were no sensors. It was just like, all right, we go. And I wanted to get back to that. And to some degree, I sort of have, which has been nice. And the thing I've enjoyed most is when someone says, hey, I'm doing this, I'd be like, cool, I'll join you. And not having to think about, oh, what's I going to do with my training or where does that fit in or how do I manipulate this to make it work for me? It's like, I'll just do what they do and that's okay.
That's I would think there's such freedom in that.
Yeah, for me there is at this stage. We'll see what happens. Like I'm not married to staying this way or never doing something goal driven again, and I'm not married to having a goal or whatever. So we'll see.
I have heard rumors that your critical power keeps going up, and the reason you know that is because you use Stride Power Meters, who supports this podcast. Talk to us about that increase.
Yeah, a little bump up again over the weekend. I did some faster stuff, and it went back up a little bit. So it's a steady increase of like just creeping back up. I mean, this is only 3 watts, but I'll take it. Any watts is good watts. So yeah, I was actually showing. I went for a run yesterday with a friend of the podcast, Eloise Dulawa, who's gearing up for a big but a little block of racing. And we were talking about Stride from the kinematics thing, the 3D kinematics, and like looking at gate stuff. And I was actually went back afterwards and sent her some screenshots of how my stride changed from the first to the 18th kilometer of my run on the treadmill at the same pace. And you can see the change and how it biases my left leg because my right leg is where the Achilles was, and you can see it deteriorate a little bit across 18 kilometers. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So it's been, I think there's a lot there that people are probably underutilizing from Stride. I mean, you do need both pods for that and the subscription, but, I think there's some value in it for people, particularly if they're post injury.
Well, if you'd like to run with the Power Meter and gain such interesting insights as David has discovered, his right leg is a little, likes finishing work early, likes popping out early out of the office. Check out Stride. We do have a link in the show notes down below, so check them out. We've got some community shout outs to go through. Oh, we got a lot today, so let's rush through them quickly. Welcome to all our new listeners here joining us in the community. Welcome to all our new followers on the Strava group. We are on Strava and the 1% Better Pod. And then again, please rate this episode. Please rate the podcast. Share this episode if it resonates with you. Help us grow together. I sort of missed this. Berlin Marathon took place last weekend. I missed everything while being in Rwanda because I was so busy. I did see Sebastian Sawe at one, and we're going to talk about it in a little while from now. But we had a few listeners too that took part. Jonathan Coates ran 2:22:42 there. He ran a split of 71:16 and 71:26. That's incredible. That is like 10
Yeah,
seconds apart each half.
that is pretty much perfect, particularly in the context of the only mild uphill in Berlin is in the second half of it. So I reckon that's pretty much even split for effort, and for energy expenditure. So well done, Jonathan. Particularly on a hot day, like a lot of people had really bad days. There's like 3 people had a good day. Jonathan was apparently one of them. I mean, we also had Christian Tramperdach, who ran 2:36:22 there. So both of those are very good runs on that day. And I was reflecting on Berlin, like that's the hottest year Berlin's had in I don't know how long, maybe ever. So like it is a bit of an unlucky thing, but at the same time, like you kind of like that's the marathon. Part of the reason the marathon's like so intoxicating for people is not because it's some magical thing. It's because it's a distance that is both achievable. You can run fast for it, but it's never guaranteed. It's like a slot machine. The reason slot machines are addictive is because you're not guaranteed of the outcome. And I reckon that's what makes it so addictive, because there you can succeed in it and there's lots of meat on the bone to get better, but also there's no guarantees. So it's intoxicating.
I also think you can't do multiple ones too often. You can't do 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 marathons in a year. So you have to get it right when you're there
Well,
on the start line, or you
unless
shouldn't.
your name's unless your name's Yuki Kawauchi, you're right.
Oh
So
yeah. But quickly on Berlin, what were the temperatures? You say it was very hot.
it was like 20 something degrees Celsius, which is like 60s, high 60s to 70 Fahrenheit.
Okay.
So it's not hot, but it's a lot hotter than it normally is. I think when I ran it, it was like close to 10 degrees or 15 degrees. Like it was, significantly cooler.
20 degrees,
So
man. I live in Africa. That's a Tuesday. What are you talking about? Also, a shout out to Alan
I've
McKenzie.
seen you. I've seen you in the cold weather. The cold weather. So don't start, mate.
Shout out to Alan McKenzie, who did 3:22 at the Loch Ness Marathon. Franco Carroll at HCA Marathon went 2:48, paced it really well, apparently.
Yeah, he did. I don't know too much about that, but I know he was really happy with his pacing, and like looking at his splits, they were right. They were like pretty much even the whole way through from the looks of it.
Cool. And then Alex Harris, Tadley went, added a 10 mile in 64 minutes, which is really good. Janet DeGroe, I think you know her. She's a
Yep.
triathlete, third overall in the
Yeah.
DTS Amsterdamse Boss Sprint.
Yeah. I mean, I feel sorry for her because she had to swim in the Boss Barn. It's pretty disgusting water. I'm
That's
not
why
sure
she
that's
was
a
so
good thing
quick.
for her.
She wanted to get out of
Yeah,
there.
well, apparently, I don't know if anyone saw videos during COVID when everything froze. It was like a long rowing lake that people were skating on in Amsterdam. That's the Bosbaan. So she did well there. I mean, I used to run a lot in the Amsterdam Boss. It's a cool story there. So congratulations to Johanna. And then we had Karen Green, who did the Rivenness 5K in 23:59. So she went for a negative split there and had some left in the tank. So that's positive for her. We had Phil Coleman, who did the Rathfarnham 5K. And did 20 minutes as part of his long run. So very good there for Phil. He's shaping well. And then Vasily Permitin did the Wild City Trail in 35 minutes, which is a trail race from memory. And then we had your better half, mate. So she tagged us and me on Strava, having done some intervals in Rwanda, Kigali, at altitude. Do you know what the altitude was in Kigali?
Yeah, 1,500 meters.
So a mile, basically. So like serious, like we're getting into serious altitude
And
there.
also, there are no flat roads. It's just up and down, up and down.
Well,
Thousand.
I think she did them around something flat, like some little circular
Yeah,
area
yeah,
that was
yeah. I
flat.
told her that's where I went and cheated when I was at Tour de Rwanda and I had to do all my run training. That was the only flat circuit I could find around there. It's like a big garden and they put in a running track around there now, which is so cool. It's beautiful.
That is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's smart to go there. So she said, I hope intervals at altitude equals crazy fitness gains. And then she tagged us and said, if this isn't true, just pretend you never saw this post. So I thought this is a good learning moment or good learning opportunity. So there's two ways to think about this. There probably no altitude in itself will give you a stimulus, right? If you're there for long enough, you get an adaptation to altitude that we kind of know about, your, increased hemoglobin mass. So more transport for oxygen, better oxygen carrying capabilities. That will happen. That is irrelevant of training to some degree. Of course, like a little bit of training will help it, but it's more about the altitude stimulus. So that's the first thing. Training will help at all times to get better, right? And from a cardiovascular standpoint. But when you're at altitude, the same external load costs more from an internal load standpoint, right? So you'll have a higher heart rate for the same output, right? So what that means is your standard intervals are going to then be done at a slower pace because the same heart rate is a slower pace. And so you end up with, I guess, fitness depends on what you're talking about. But in this case, you end up with a lower mechanical stress, which could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. But if you're trying to run fast, you need to have that mechanical stress as well. So it's kind of, I wouldn't say it's about fitness or not fitness. It's about nuance here. So it always all depends. But more cardiovascular load for the same mechanical load, or vice versa, you'd say for the same cardiovascular load, you have less mechanical load.
And then our final community shout outs. I love this because you very rarely get stuff wrong when you got something wrong. Yeah. Heather replied to us.
It was you, mate. It wasn't me. Don't lie. It
You
was you.
impersonating me. Heather replied on Spotify on one of our episodes and said, what I see on Wikipedia is Raven Saunders won the silver medal in the 2021 Tokyo Olympics shot put. In the 2024 Paris Olympics, she advanced to the final but placed 11th. And then David.
So we'll get back to what happened there. But so just for context, 2 episodes ago we were talking about Raven Saunders in the context of a whereabouts failures, and I said I think she got silver in Paris, and it turned out she was silver from Tokyo. So thank you for the correction there, Heather.
And then
But usually we are corrected by Helen, and I was so excited that Helen corrected us, and I said, "Geez, that's it. Knew I got it confused somewhere. Thank you, Helen." And she said, "I don't want to have to correct you twice, but it's actually Heather." And I said, "Oh, sorry about that. This is Xylon." So yeah.
Oh, I love that. Love that interaction. Oh, let's move on to what's come across my desk. With a look at what's happening in the sporting world in the last while. Jan Frodeno ran 50K at Côte d'Ivoire by UTMB, which is really cool because we spoke on this podcast about him obviously he's one of his main partners. Hoka is the title sponsor at UTMB, and he was going to do the race there but not qualify, just do the race. He decided against it and wanted to go through the qualification process like all athletes do.
Yeah, I think so. He basically was made aware of that, qualification process. He realized it was, similar to Kona, and he was like, "All right, I want to do respect for UTMB and do it that way." So I think it's great. I said to you at the time, I thought he'd be pretty good because Jan doesn't really do things by halves. He lives in Andorra, like there's enough trail running around there, so I figured he'd be okay. He did go to this Côte d'Azur. It's down in Nice, basically. It's a trail run up behind Nice into the mountains there, and then come back down into Nice, finish in Nice. And I think it's important that he does this, partially just because if you have to do these sort of things, you have to learn to cope with weather, so to speak, and safety on trail, and that's a big part of trail running. And things can go wrong. People have died at the UTMB festival. No one likes to talk about it, but it's happened, right? So you need to be able to sort of look after yourself there. So I'm happy this happened. And anyway, he got 16th overall. He was the 15th male, so did really well there. It was a 55K race with 2,147 meters. So that's 63,000 feet. And he ran that and it's about 30 something miles. And he did that in 5 hours, 27 minutes.
Kudos to Jan Frodeno. Absolutely love that about him. And then Berlin Marathon, we mentioned it earlier. As I said, I was traveling. I sort of missed it. I saw the men's results. How did it go down?
Well, see, I was trying to watch this, and it turns out that for some reason Sky didn't have the rights, or no one on Sky had the rights in the UK. It was on FlowTrack, so I didn't end up getting to watch it, unfortunately. I wasn't that bought in. We talked a bit about how diluted the autumn marathons fields were, given Sydney plus World Championships. You had this really, and Chicago, and of course New York. You sort of had this really diluted Berlin fields, and to some degree diluted other fields. Anyway, Sebastian Sawe was probably the big name there. He did really well. He ran 2:02:16. It's a wild run. Again, the guy is obviously in ridiculous shape and knew that, and so did Adidas, and that's why they did some testing on him. Again, go back a couple episodes, we talked a bit about this, him getting tested. So let's call it meticulously pre this, because he ran 2:02:16. His PB is 2:02:05. So on a hot day, he runs right near his PB. Now, granted, this is only his third marathon, I think. So he's not. You would anticipate an improvement here, but nonetheless, when you're near the pointy end, improvement is still difficult. So anyway, if he'd run this on a cool day, I wouldn't have called it a bad run. I would say maybe he's disappointed, but not a bad run. His PB is 2:02:05 from Valencia last year, and he ran 2:02:27 in London this year as well. So like he's peppering 2:02 here, which speaks to, again, how when you're close to that peak performance, not necessarily peak human performance, which he is, but even your peak performance, it gets harder and harder to have a great day. But he was on world record split at the half. He ran 60:16 through the half, and he'd lost all his paces apparently at that point, unsurprisingly, on a day like that. And he was still on pace to break the course record, which is slower than the world record, at 30K. So, I mean, he's had a bit of a day and then hasn't really blown up that much. I mean, he ran 60:16. He only negatively split it by 2 minutes. I say only positively split it by 2 minutes, which, if you have a real punt and it's a hot day, like, that's not terrible. Like, I'm a big believer in like trying to run as even as possible, perhaps negative split. But I mean, if you're gonna have a punt for the world record, you kind of have to just do it. That's the pace you have to run. So I'd be pretty convinced this guy's going to run a world record next time he has a good day, if he can have some people around him. I mean, he'll certainly be in shape to do it. Whether he will do it, I don't know, but he's near enough or nearing that sort of level of performance. So that would be spring next year would be the time to look out for that. So I would suggest then he probably runs London again. I mean, he won London this year. They'll give him a lot of money to come back. If it's a good day in London, he's a shot. So yeah, we talked about the slot machine analogy already with the marathon, which is something I wanted to mention. And then just to be for completeness, Rosemary Wanjiru from Kenya won this race. She ran 2:21:05. So that should speak to how tough a day it was. Women's marathons these days in World Marathon Majors are getting won sub 2:20 almost exclusively. So for her to run 2:21 speaks to, like, it was a pretty rough day. So that again speaks to how good a run Sebastian Sawe had.
Cool. And then should we
I
move
wanted
on?
to, I wanted to ask you, mate, about the World Champs. Let's get to that because you were there. Like, how was it? Like, people are talking about how hard the race was. We'll certainly get to that. But like, how was the experience for you? I know it's something you've been passionate about for a while.
Man, where to start? So, cycling world champs coming to Africa and Rwanda in particular for the very first time. I think it was a great advert for Africa and Rwanda and the capability of hosting world class events because for the first time we saw very, very, very few crashes in the race. Whereas in last year in Switzerland, someone died at the World Championship. So safety's been
Wow.
the reason why I bring it up. Safety's been a big talking point this year. Also, crowds are generally a problem in cycling. One of the most beautiful things about cycling is how close you can get to the athletes when they pass on a mountain in particular, but sometimes it interrupts them because you can get so close. Yeah, you saw thousands, hundreds of thousands of crowds never stepping into the road, like just being very respectful. And I don't know if that speaks to a greater conversation around how uh, the things this country has in place to have built itself back up from the genocide, so law and order, etc. But overall, just incredible. Yeah, I often ask people what it was like from the outside, like what it looked like from the outside. What do you think?
I didn't watch any of it, mate. I'll be honest. It was a busy week for me. I got none of it, saw none of it. But I've certainly I've observed some social media. I follow some people who are in cycling on social media, and everybody was positive about it. I was like, beautiful country, changed my perspective on it, want to come back, all those things.
That was the interesting thing. So, like, my passion in life is to globalize professional cycling through Africa and to change the narrative of how people view cycling. And I bumped into Kazia Nivedoma at a coffee shop on one of her rides. And I said to Kazia, we're looking to change the narrative. You need to post about Rwanda. And she said, change the narrative. The narrative is already changed. I love this place. It's just incredible. And later that night, she put out a post on her preconceived ideas of coming here. She was worried about getting stomach issues, wasn't so sure. And it just completely, like she said, sometimes we go to a place and we think we're going to help that place, but that place actually helps us and it helps soften our hearts and gets us to see a new world. And I love that from her. Like, and we saw that from many different athletes, you know. And then in addition to that, there are obviously some things that we still have a lot of work ahead of us. There are still a lot of those prejudices. And then also at a high level, I'm not sure if it was true transformation in the sense that this was one of the hardest world championships ever. We
What
saw,
do just double clicking on a word there that I think you're using and assuming people understand when you say transformation? What do you mean?
well, I think I'm going to use words that have been politicized here, like diversity, like globalization. What I mean is tuning into a professional bike race, tuning into the Tour de France and having a look at the peloton and not just all being white faces from Europe, like seeing
So
many different continents represented within there.
so that
Um,
word transformation has meaning in South Africa that it doesn't have in the rest of the world, which is why I double clicked there. So that
yeah, yeah,
meaning of transformation in South Africa, as I understand it, is something that used to be all white now representing the country better and being more representative of the country, right?
right.
So, for instance, the Springboks going from a team that was all white to now being representative of the country based on having people of all sorts of races and mixes and all that is now a representation of the country. So that's what you meant by transformation, which is why I double clicked there for our US listeners and our UK listeners and all those people who are like, oh yeah, what is transformation? Like he said, transformation, and they have their own conception of what that means. But let's get onto this. Let's double click here on how hard this was because this had the lowest finishing percentage of the men's world championships this century, right? So 18.2%. Only 30 people finished out of 165 starters, which is super low.
Yeah, and I predicted that the moment the course came out. I said this was going to happen in the men's and the women's race. You'll have anywhere between 50 to 40 people only finishing. It was even lower. I bumped into the head coach of the Dutch team at a coffee shop, Lawrence Den Dam, before the race, and we spoke about this and we said this is going to happen. And I was at Benny Girmai's press conference. So for people who don't know, Benny comes from Eritrea, and last year he won the green jersey along with 3 stages in the Tour de France. No black African has ever done that before. And he was complaining about how hard the course is for Africans. And going back to the transformation conversation, it is about creating a level, equal playing field for everyone. And Africans have had challenges that Europeans have not had to have. Europeans have access to racing. You can fall out of bed and you can fail often, and you can learn often from those mistakes and race every single week. And then through those failures, learn very quickly and develop very quickly. For Africa to get to Europe, you have a lack of access of freedom of travel in terms of visas, etc., races, etc. So to come here, bring the best athletes in the world, Tour de France winners come here, and then make the race doubly as hard. Is riders came here out of just completing the Volta a España, and they're competing against riders who've barely raced this year, who've barely had access to racing. So those are some things I think the governing body could have looked at. Also, TV commentary. I wasn't very happy with the TV commentary. It was just the standard commentators that you generally have, and they have very little knowledge on Africa, and they have very little knowledge of the African athletes. I noticed actually at the World Athletics Championships, I don't know if you noticed this when you watch, you had your 2 main anchor commentators, and then often they would bring in for a particular race, like a specialist on the 800 meter, particularly someone who was maybe au fait with the Kenyan athletes who were the favorites, and talk about the pacing and when they're going to attack and how they're going to attack, because this is how they train. And I feel that is something that was lacking from this World Championships, to really transform it from the top down. So yeah, that's maybe a little more on the negative side.
Well, I mean, I think we're both making a good pitch for ourselves over and over again to be brought into commentary teams. So if anybody knows anybody, pull us in. We're here for it. But no, thanks, mate. That's interesting to see. I mean, listen, from what I just from a results standpoint, I think the women's race is pretty competitive. The men's race sounded like Poggy just soloed it from 60 k's out, and Poggy did Poggy, and that was that.
Yeah, he did that. It was quite interesting. I was watching while that was going on. I was in hospitality and I was chatting to some of Remco's sponsors, and I was at the table with his wife. And then right next door was the table of the UAE management to Pogacar rides for. So they were obviously the two favorites, and there wasn't a lot of talking taking place between those two tables. It was interesting. And then in the women's race was none of the favorites won. It was a complete shock. The woman who won, this was only a second ever victory, and that's because the favorites have only themselves to blame. They were looking at each other and they were like, "You chase, you chase, you chase." I think everyone was so scared of blowing up in those conditions, the humidity, the altitude, the elevation, that they were so cautious. And kudos to the breakaway. They bought a ticket to the lottery and they won. But yeah, should we move on then to Boston Marathon news? Feels like we've been talking a lot of marathons this episode, but there has been some interesting news on the qualifier front.
Yeah, so basically, you know what happens is you apply, you run your time for Boston, right? You run under the minimum qualification time, right? And then they start taking people who are the fastest, and then they fill up progressively, and then you end up with this cutoff line that happens. And we've now found out the cutoff line for Boston next year was 4 minutes 34 seconds, which is to say, if you were faster, if you were 4 minutes and 35 seconds faster than the qualification time, you got in. And it seems like this happens every year. It's a little bit different, but roughly, if I was coaching someone, I'd be shooting for running 5 minutes underneath. I wouldn't say you're safe at 5 minutes, but I reckon under 5 minutes, you're definitely not safe. So that seems to be roughly what that is. And to be honest, to be comfortable, I'd probably be saying 7 minutes, which people get funny about, but that's the
Do you
reality of the
remember what?
situation here. You want to be comfortable, and like, yeah. I my first Boston qualifier, I ran 2:58, and that I needed to run under 3 hours, and I was a minute and like 2 seconds or something, and that had just dropped 5 minutes. So it came from 3:05 to 3. So I was like, oh, if I'm under this, I'm fine. But that was the year the Vaporfly was released, so I actually wasn't fine. The next time I ran it, having to run 3 hours, I ran 2:49. So I was like, I'm going. So I just booked stuff. I was like, there's no way that this number is going to be less than 11 minutes, like or more than 11 minutes. So I knew that I'd be fine at 2:49. So yeah.
Interesting, man. Oh, this qualification. That's the things you don't think about is the logistics behind the qualifications and the travel and all of that. Wow, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, listen, all these world marathon majors are expensive. So if you're going to Boston, like the earlier you can book, the better. But you have to be comfortable to know that you're going. Right? And maybe people aren't. So yeah, like it is what it is.
David, you and I actually met working at a continuous glucose company, and glucose was a
Yep, worst
big
day of my
talking
life.
point. Glucose was a big talking point for us back then. Recently, actually, I'm hearing more and more CGM news and athletes trying it out, etc. So it's so interesting that you found this paper in this space. So I'm really, really happy to talk about glucose again. This paper was called "Comparative Effects of Continuous Glucose Monitoring Informed and Traditional Interval-Based Carbohydrate Refueling Protocols on Endurance Exercise Responses." An exploratory study. Man, could they have chosen a longer title?
Yeah, welcome to science. You either do real good marketing title and use some acronym, or you do something like this, a real descriptive title, like what did we actually do? But yeah, I'm still very active in the space. I was actually reviewing a paper yesterday, not reviewing, sorry, finishing off a paper that we're submitting in the CGM space as well from back then. So that speaks to how long science takes, right? That company's been dead for 2 years ish, and we're still trying to submit papers from it. So anyway, this paper was interesting, and this is probably where many companies in the sports space are talking about, which is to say, can we improve fueling using a CGM, right? Continuous glucose monitor. So in this, we had 12 participants, so pretty small, but they use themselves as controls. So you end up with each person that has their own control. So it's a bit better in that respect. So they did 2 trials. It was 75 minutes of continuous cycling at 50% of peak power output. So it's not a super high intensity, which is my one concern with this. But so be it. You've got to get people to do 75 minutes of exercise, and so if you go too hard, people blow up or whatever, and it's hard to get ethical approval and get study subjects and all that stuff. So anyway, what they did here was they got them on the two occasions. They either fueled to the guidelines, so they took a drink every 15 minutes, or they fueled based on CGM. So the way continuous glucose monitors work, they give you an output, which gives you a reading. It will also give you a trend arrow to show, are you trending straight, flat? Are you going up diagonally, which is like a slow up, or are you vertical up, so a quick up? And then they have a slow down or a direct down. Basically, if there was a trend arrow showing any downward movement or a drop of 0.1 to 0.2 millimolar on two consecutive readings, which is 1 to 3 milligrams per deciliter, you ended up fueling. Otherwise, you just took a placebo. So basically, the way they mixed this was they got some electrolyte drink, and then they added maltodextrin, or they didn't add maltodextrin. So if you were in the fueling conventional arm, every 50 minutes you took the mix of everything. If you were in the CGM arm and you didn't have a low trace or whatever, then you took just the electrolytes. Otherwise, you took it with carbohydrates, basically. Interestingly, and this is one of the areas, as you know, that I would have been really interested in, was looking how frequently the CGM output data points, because some of them only output every 15 minutes, and this one's outputting every 5 minutes. So they obviously had a continuous thing there, so they could get an idea. Basically, they had a couple of measures every 15 minutes, and then they made a decision about what the person took or not. So in the traditional protocol, we already talked about this. They used, anyway, we won't go into exactly what they used here, but they end up that if you were drinking every 15 minutes, you ended up getting about 51.2 grams of carbs per hour, which I think is mad because it's not 60, and they were trying to get to 60. I don't know how they messed that up. The math wasn't done properly, but whatever. Obviously, in the CGM trial, you took as much as you needed based on your CGM, right? The interesting thing here was there wasn't actually a real difference in anything in
between
like
the
any
two.
measures. Yeah. So you had a lower you in the CGM trace, you had lower glucose and it was less and it was more stable. Other than that, all other things were the same. So that doesn't surprise me to some degree because if you're not going to increase your fueling with this, right? There's a ceiling effect to this. You could only reduce it. And so, you weren't going to take more. It wasn't like, oh, if you're low, you have to take more. And given the duration and the intensity, I'm not surprised we didn't see a great deal of difference between them because it's pretty unlikely that you're going to exhaust any level of stored glucose, right? Any glycogen stores, anything like that. You're not going to see a big difference. And it wasn't a performance trial, right? So we weren't doing a time trial. It wasn't a certain amount of work completed as quickly as possible. It was right at this period of time, and we'll check how you feel. We'll check your heart rate. We'll check all that stuff. So you're probably not going to see a big difference here because we're not creating a huge metabolic disturbance. This fits a lot. We had Andrew Kutnick on the podcast quite a while ago, and we talked to him about a paper he did where they looked at. I think we talked about this paper. If not, he certainly wrote a paper where they looked at taking as little as 10 grams of glucose an hour to try and defend blood glucose. And the theory there is if you can keep blood glucose pretty defended, then you'll be fine. And they showed, again, no inferiority in that context. And this supports that, which is if you can keep blood glucose pretty stable and people are pretty happy. I'm not sure that is the case for performance as much as whether it's the case that it is possible, right? So there's this, is it possible or is it optimal? And I don't have the answer to that question, but it certainly looks to be possible. I don't know if it's optimal in this context. And again, that optimal versus possible in this context probably relates to your goals as well. Is your goal to go as fast as possible? Or is your goal to have the minimum viable fueling for you to complete things and feel okay about it? And in that context, maybe CGM helps, maybe a low dose of glucose helps rather than piling it in so that you can get to the finish line as fast as possible and maybe have disaster pants and. So it's an interesting, it's an interesting sort of realm we're entering with both CGM and in general.
Thanks for finding that. I really miss using a CGM and having insight into my glucose. But it also did teach me to go to feel. So now if I have, I don't know, a hyper response. I can feel it. Like I don't even need a CGM. I know exactly what's happening because I've had visibility for such a long time into my glucose, which is interesting. Something else I'm also not using much at the moment are Supershoes. You found some research on them. So they definitely look to help us from what we can see, but one question is whether the effect is maintained after hours of running. Talk to us about what you found here.
Yeah, I guess generally all the papers sort of look at, have we improved running economy, right? To this point anyway. And they generally look to improve running economy. They go, great, it's 4% improvement in running economy. That's great. It translates to whatever performance. Fine. The question is it still 4% after 90 minutes or 2 hours or 2.5 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours? Right. And so what we started to understand is that at different paces, it's probably maintained, which is to say the 4 hour marathoner probably gets a benefit as well. Right. Now that benefit looks to be a similar percentage, which probably says it's going to be a greater absolute amount, i.e., you're going to save more minutes because it's the same percentage. Fine. In this study, they look to investigate, is that effect, that running economy improvement, is that maintained after a long period of time? Right, lots of running, which is a standard question. Shout out to Marco Altini, who listens, is a future guest, and sent me this paper actually. So we're discussing this on text message. So they used, it was interesting here, they used 10 male distance runners with a half marathon time of 75 minutes plus or minus 3 minutes. So these guys can move. Their weekly training volume, and this is really important, we'll sort of touch on this as to why it's important, was 74 kilometers plus or minus 21 kilometers. So that's roughly, like, let's call it 80 kilometers. That's 50 miles. So like we're close to 50 miles a week here, plus or minus, that's about 10 miles. So, there or thereabouts. And the two shoes they used, and thankfully they mentioned these by name, was the Nike Pegasus and the Nike Alpha Fly 3. So we have a very good standard shoe, right? And by that I mean is like, there's no conjecture, is this a standard shoe or not? Pegasus is like, yeah, it's barn door, like that is a standard shoe.
There's
And
actually
then,
two shoes are running. So interesting.
yeah.
Oh,
Well, and you wouldn't be alone in that. So it's like it's a very barn door standard shoe. It's nothing magic about it. It's very stock standard, which is great as a control shoe. And then similarly, you have the Alpha Fly, which is like pretty classic super shoe. It's not
mm.
like, oh, is it super or is it do something different? It's like, no, it's very, very clear. So, unsurprisingly, the super shoe enhanced running economy, reduced perceived exertion, and lactate compared to the normal running shoe during prolonged running. Right? So, when I ran a super shoe in this context, if I'm running the same pace, I have lower RPE, my running economy is better, and I have lower lactate. So, we have objective and subjective measures saying that this shoe helps me run. Right? And then similarly, there was also a lower heart rate and a lower VO2, so inspired oxygen. Let's talk about what they did actually first. So basically, they came in to determine their lactate thresholds and running economy in both the super shoe and the normal shoe, right? So they came in and did that. That was their first visit. So they warmed up, did a step test, then they had then they stopped, had some carbohydrate, then warmed up a second time, and then a step test again in the two different shoes. And they swapped that for different participants, so it wasn't always the same. So you don't have an interaction there. Then they did 3 more visits. In the first of these next 3 visits, in these 3 visits, they did a warm up, a block of running of 80 minutes, then they had a 10-minute jog, and then they did a step test. And the goal here is to fatigue you and then look at where your thresholds were, your running economy at those different stages, right? So we see now, is this the same as when you're fresh, right? And that's how they did it. And they did, in that 80-minute block, they did a couple of different trials, right? So they had the normal shoe, the non-super shoe. They did 80 minutes at 95% of their first threshold, right? Their pace in that shoe, from that shoe specifically. In the second trial, they did 80 minutes, 95% of the threshold in the super shoe, and again, in their super shoe. And then the third trial, they did the same thing. I don't know why they did that. Oh, sorry. Got that wrong. Second trial, they did super shoe wearing, but they did 95% of the first threshold of the non-super shoe. And then they did super shoe wearing, 95% of threshold at the super shoe, of the first threshold of the super shoe. So basically what we're getting here is an understanding of, because those paces are different, right? So in this, the average was 14.7 kilometers plus or minus half a kilometer for the normal shoe, and the super shoe is 15.2 plus or minus 0.4. So basically a half a kilometer an hour faster in the Supershoe. All right, so those are external workloads. Anyway, that's not a huge deal, but basically what we're looking for here is the effect of 80 minutes of running fatiguing you on then your running economy. So they looked at matching trials for internal workload. Even there, the Supershoe was superior, right, in terms of heart rate despite faster running speeds. So nothing really changed across the 80 minutes, which is really interesting. And there was a consistent benefit here. So basically, whatever we saw from the as a delta was maintained over 80 minutes. My concern here, or my criticism, if there is one, or my feedback, right, and I think this is a great study. I think they've done well on it. These people are pretty durable. They're running 80 Ks a week, right? These people have got a 75-minute half marathon. So 80 minutes at 95% of your first threshold, that's basically zone 2. 80 minutes of zone 2 is not that fatiguing for these people. You probably could have done something else above that threshold and below second threshold, which is where both half marathon and marathon pace are, right? So maybe you'd shoot for a rough idea of marathon pace and do 80 minutes of marathon pace and then look at it. But again, you have to get people who agree to this, come do 3 trials, plus you have to get ethics approval. So I appreciate that may not be that possible. And this is indicative of, hey, these probably don't decay too much, right? But the decay could be in both the person or the shoe, so to speak, to some degree. Because like you could, despite the shoe, you could decay because you're not quite durable enough, regardless of the shoe, right? So yeah, it's a cool study. It is a first study of this sort of nature. It's going to add to the research, and I think it's good. If I was this research group, that would be my next question: is can we run these guys and girls a little, or let's get some girls. Is the first thing, and the second thing is can we get them run a little bit faster for a little bit longer, or faster for shorter, or faster for the same time, just to see what happens there, because that's the real interesting thing here, right? So, yeah, interesting study. I was enjoying reading it.
Thank you, Marco, for finding that. I know our listeners really enjoy this kind of content. So we'll hope to bring you more soon. Before we go, should we have a look at the doctor's office? You were telling me that Josh Kerr is in the doctor's office. Is that from the World Athletic Championships where I saw him get injured?
Yep. Yeah, exactly right. So he pulled up, and people were questioning whether whether he got spiked or whether he tweaked a calf or something like this. Apparently, he tweaked his calf in the semi, and then in the final, he ended up with a grade 2 calf tear. Right, so that's come out
Oof.
now that he had a grade 2 calf
So
tear.
probably
So I mean, you
shouldn't
could
have
see him
started.
limping around. Well, that's a really good. I'm really happy you said that. This is the really murky area of decision making and shared decision making and adults having rights when you work in sports medicine. This is why I ended up not going into sports medicine, because in my mind he doesn't start. But you can't do that to an adult male who wants to start this and is like, I have the right to start this. You can't stop me, right? So and help me get there. So I used to find this hard to resolve in my head. It's like there's not a lot of benefit to this. He's not going to run well. There was no chance in my mind, if I'd known this ahead of time, that I thought he would have come anything but last in that final.
Yeah,
So now
no
you're allowing him
upside.
to run. Yeah, there's only downside aside from he decides he wants to do it and he was set on it. So I just yeah, it's hard here. I get it. I get why he ran. I get why they allowed him to run, and I also get the other side of the coin, and I lie on that personally, and that's why I didn't end up going into this sort of medicine, because it's just murky.
And then I got a major bone to pick with you. You sent me a video of Tyreek Hill dislocating his knee. Like, man, I've never seen a leg go at a 90-degree angle like that. Like, that was
It
horrible.
went the other way, yeah. So
NFL
the reason I
player.
wanted to, yeah. So Tyreek Hill's we also talked about him in a sprint sense because he wanted to race Noah Lyles and a few other things. So um, the reason I brought this up is because it's a good example of a couple of things, and there's some interesting stuff here. Your knee isn't one joint, just like your shoulder isn't one joint, right? So there's a few things in there. There's the thing we kind of understand to be the shoulder, right, which is where the upper arm meets here. So that what we call um, the glenohumeral joint, right? So where the glenoid fossa has the humerus in it, right? It's not very funny, but yeah. But there's actually 4 joints, right? There's a sternoclavicular joint, the acromioclavicular joint, etc., etc., etc. So that's the shoulder joint complex with what we colloquially know as the shoulder. In the leg, we have the same thing, right? So you actually have a joint between the tibia and the femur, right? So your upper leg and your shin bone, right? So that's the tibiofemoral joint. But you also have the tibia and the fibula, the two bones in the lower leg, come together just below where the tibia has the tibial plateau. And then you have the patellofemoral joint, which is where the patella, your kneecap, articulates with the femur, your upper leg bone. Now, you can dislocate your patella, which is not uncommon. It's actually quite a common injury in sport, relatively speaking. This was not that. This was a twisting motion whereby he ends up tearing multiple knee ligaments. So this is about his tibiofemoral joint. Now, it's said that he has definitely torn his ACL, which is unsurprising, and other ligaments. He's probably torn at least one other one. I'd say more likely two. You only have 4 knee ligaments. You have the 2 on the sides, the collateral ligaments, and then you have 2 cruciates that sit through the middle that stop it moving in all these other directions, right? So he's had a twisting motion. He's probably torn 2 to 3 of those. But the interesting thing here is you have, and this is back to what we said at the start around understanding priorities and risks and what's more important with respect to airway in resus. In this case, you have nerves and blood vessels. Now, we can reconstruct bones and ligaments, but if you tear these things, it's a real problem, right? Or if you damage them, particularly the blood vessel, because that's a pretty big blood vessel that supplies a lot of the leg. So you have to make sure very quickly that there isn't an injury to this blood vessel. So that's one of the first things they would have done is check the pulses of his foot to make sure they're still going, still
Oh,
working.
wow.
So, because if not, that's a medical emergency. He has to get there because he's a chance of like losing significant blood, right? And he still went pretty quickly. I mean, they've got good doctors in the NFL. Like they would have done all this. The other thing is, if you damage that nerve, the peroneal nerve, you basically lose function of that foot. A lot of sensation, but a lot of function. So the foot, you end up with drop foot and all sorts of problems there. So like that's his career, not to mention quality of life, right? He ends
Yeah.
up. So the point being, there's a lot of stuff that could get damaged here that's a real concern. That's much more concerning than the ligaments or whatever else. And that's with respect to like how does his rehab go? Because there's lots of discussions around what's his timeline to return. Can he return? Like he certainly can, but will he is a different question. Now, whenever you get an injury to the knee, and whenever you injure ligaments of the knee, you have a chance of injuring meniscus, which is a real problem for long-term knee health. You can also injure bones and cartilage, which again, they're more long-term issues than they are short-term. They will give you a short-term problem, but they will rear their head as, in 30, 40 years. I remember somebody once telling me, one of the knee surgeons said that, an ACL with meniscus damage ages your knee 30 years. So, in this context, he may end up fine and rehab because he's a sports person. He's got the best resources available. He'll be fine to maybe return in that context. But in 30 years, the question is how good is his knee and what ends up happening.
I'm just clenching my teeth the whole time you're talking because I'm still visualizing the video you sent me. And basically, if you haven't seen this, like the bottom half of his leg from the knee down was like at a right angle, pointing inwards towards his body. Oh, it was horrible. So it makes complete sense everything you've just gone through there and what the complications could be. What are we watching this weekend? I am back home on the couch. Got to get my bearings again after almost 2 weeks of travel. But I had a quick look, and there are lots of sport on this weekend.
Well, what are you watching, mate? What's on this weekend that you're going to watch?
I'll be watching the rugby. The Springboks are playing. I'll be trying to avoid Manchester United. F1's on. European Cycling Championships. Good luck, Europe, living up to Africa. Championships last weekend. World Championships. Good luck.
It's mad. It's mad to have the Europeans after the Worlds. That makes no sense.
It makes the cycling calendar makes zero sense. It is just so disjointed. There's no narrative to it. The biggest race in the world, the Tour de France, happens in the middle of the season. It makes no sense.
Yep. I don't have anything else to say about it. Yes.
You asked me for a rant. You put me onto a rant. What are you watching this weekend?
Couple of things, mate. So rugby's on, of course. I had a big weekend last weekend. I watched a ton of sport. Well, wasn't doing very well. So the Geelong Cats lost the grand final to the Brisbane Lions. I'm a soft Lions fan, but I'm a Geelong Cats fan, so that was unfortunate in the AFL. I then had, Man U lost. Fine, that happens. I'm not a super staunch Man U supporter. I mean, they're my team, but like I don't. Whatever. I'm not
Ruins
like you.
my weekend. Ruins my weekend. Literally.
That's not me. Obviously, Wallabies lost, so that wasn't a great one either. But the Steelers won, which was great in Dublin. They got a win, so I was two wins there, and then the Broncos won. So, I'm sorry, the Broncos is the second win, the Brisbane Broncos. So they play the NRL Grand Final, the Rugby League Grand Final in Australia this weekend. So yeah, I was 2 from 5 last weekend, and so I'll try and watch the league and the union this weekend. Try and watch both of those.
The Steelers played in Ireland in an NFL game.
They did. They played the Vikings in Ireland and won. So
interesting. We're seeing more and more of this. I think Real Madrid and maybe Barcelona. I think a La Liga game is taking place for the first time outside of Spain this season.
yeah, well,
Interesting.
all these teams want to expand globally, want to have global fan bases, and so they can sell merch all over the world, right? And so they will try and do that and create these different fan things. So the NFL wants to expand. There's no question because it's pretty much the biggest sport in America anyway. So yeah, they have to expand it. So they've taken they used to do games once a year. The Jacksonville Jags would go to London. Now they're doing more than one game in London. And last year they took a game to Germany and it sold out in like seconds. So, and again, you just have NFL fans that go to those. They don't care about the teams. They just go, the NFL fans. And the same, Steelers have got a bit of a link to London. And so, yeah, they went to London to Dublin or to Ireland. And so they went to Ireland to play. So that'll be a regular fixture for them, I think, now going forward. And there'll be a few other teams that start to go to different parts of, of Europe particularly. And then I think they're taking the game to Australia at some point as well. Because again, West Coast US is far from Australia, and time zone wise it is, but it's probably not terrible compared to, if you go to, let's go like, Germany, like Eastern Germany. It's quite far from the West Coast of the US. So, like it's kind of 6 to 1, half dozen the other. So you send the East Coast teams that way and you send the West Coast teams the other way. So yeah, it's interesting to see all this. I mean, I wanted to go to that Steelers game. I didn't end up going, but I should have. And so, I'll go maybe next year to the Steelers game.
You should have. Definitely should have. Anyway, we got to get out of here. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for downloading and streaming. Subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so yet. Rate the podcast and share this episode with a friend. That is all we are asking of you. Not much. David, thanks so much for putting this together. I really enjoyed that.
No, thank you, mate. And we will talk next week. We'll be back. Got back in person, regular, no delayed for a little while. I love it. So Thank you, mate. Talk soon.
Catch you on the next one.